Millions of people followed every rule they were told to follow. They worked hard, saved consistently, and avoided unnecessary risks, believing this was the safest and most responsible path forward. Yet they still ended up with nothing. Not because of war, not because of bad personal decisions, and not because they failed, but because of one financial decision most people never noticed. A decision so quiet and technical that it barely made headlines. Yet it erased an entire generation's wealth, not through a sudden collapse, but through a slow and invisible process that almost no one recognized while it was unfolding. For decades after World War II, money felt stable, predictable, almost boring. You earned it first and then you spent it. Saving was rewarded, patience mattered, and avoiding speculation was considered responsible behaviour. Banks encouraged discipline, governments promised stability, and for a long time that promise appeared to be real and dependable, shaping how entire generations understood work, money, and security. During the mid-20th century, the global financial system itself was designed around limits. Currencies were tied together, money had boundaries, and governments could not create it freely without consequence. For ordinary people, this structure worked in ways that now feel difficult to imagine. Wages grew alongside productivity, savings held their value year after year, and a single income could realistically support a family and build a future, reinforcing the belief that discipline alone was enough. Over time, however, those limits began to feel uncomfortable. Economic growth slowed, political pressure increased, and expectations rose faster than the system could naturally support. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, governments wanted flexibility and banks wanted expansion, and what had once been seen as stability began to feel like an obstacle, leading to a quiet shift away from restraint and toward convenience. This shift did not arrive with warnings or dramatic announcements. In the early 1970s, money was separated from its final anchor, and the rules that had constrained creation were quietly removed. From that moment on, money no longer needed to be earned before it was spent. It could be created first and justified later, gradually and at enormous scale, without triggering immediate alarm, because nothing appeared to break all at once. At first, daily life continued as usual. Markets rose, consumption increased, and many people felt wealthier than ever, which made the change easy to ignore. But this is precisely where the danger lay, because when change feels invisible, people do not protect themselves from it. And when problems develop slowly, they rarely feel urgent until it is too late to respond. Inflation did not arrive as a crisis that demanded attention. It blended quietly into everyday life. Prices rose slowly, savings lost value silently, and wages struggled to keep up year after year. There was never a single moment when people collectively realized something fundamental had gone wrong. Instead, they adjusted, assuming the situation was temporary and that stability would eventually return. People worked longer hours, saved more aggressively, delayed major decisions, and lowered expectations, telling themselves this was simply how the modern world worked. And when these sacrifices still were not enough, they blamed themselves. They believed they were not disciplined enough, not careful enough, or not patient enough, because believing the problem was personal felt safer than questioning the system itself. What most people did not realize was that the system had already changed. The behaviors that once guaranteed stability were no longer rewarded in the same way. An entire generation continued playing by old principles inside a framework that quietly punished them for doing so, creating a widening gap between effort and outcome that could not be closed through discipline alone. Wealth did not disappear overnight. It eroded slowly and persistently. Those who owned assets adapted to the new reality and benefited from it, while those who relied primarily on savings fell further behind each year. The same effort produced completely different outcomes, not because people became careless, but because the system had begun rewarding risk over restraint, altering the very definition of financial success. This is how wealth vanishes without being stolen, without collapse, and without dramatic headlines, through slow and constant erosion that feels normal while it is happening. By the time the shift became obvious, the gap was no longer temporary, it was structural, and reversing it required far more than individual effort. This realization is deeply uncomfortable because it challenges a belief many people still hold. Discipline alone does not guarantee security when the rules themselves change. Following the old rules in a new system does not protect you, it quietly places you at a disadvantage. If this story feels familiar, it should, because we are still living with the consequences. Saving feels fragile, risk feels unavoidable, and money feels unstable in ways previous generations did not experience. Many people sense that something is wrong, but struggle to explain why, because the change did not arrive with a clear turning point or a public debate. The foundation shifted quietly, and by the time its effects became obvious, the outcome had already been shaped. This is why the most powerful financial decisions are rarely debated in public. They do not arrive as emergencies, they do not demand attention, and they do not ask for permission. They are implemented quietly, justified later, and normalized over time. And by the time most people realize the rules have changed, the wealth is already gone.